Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Student Novianti. My student's number is 2021-22-059. Here I ask the moderator for group 1 and we will present about why do we assess. All presenters will deliver the materials and then after that we may have question and answer session at the end of our presentation.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Susni Gusti Nurhasan Munadi and my student's number is 202122045. And in this occasion, I would like to deliver a little bit explanation about the definition and the fundamental aspect of language assessment. Well, we step on the first point, that is the definition of language assessment. Assessment refers to all those activities undertaken by teachers and students in assessing themselves, which provide information to be used as feedback to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. Based on this definition, there are two main points that is important. First, an assessment activity can be carried out between a teacher and a student or a group of students. It can also carry out between a student and other students among themselves. Second, this activity includes classroom tests and daily assessment. And the large scale of tests that our students take is TOEFL and IELTS. Next is the fundamental aspects of language assessment. According to Taylor and Nolan in 2008, there are four fundamental aspects of classroom assessment. The first is assessment event. This point means that as a teacher, we need to consider how many assessments will be used and how frequently the use in classroom. It should be prepared clearly so the assessment will be effective and support the student in developing their knowledge. The second, assessment tools. Assessment tools can support the assessment process and student learning. Choosing an assessment tool is same as with choosing a scale to measure our body weight. For example, we can access student ability to read using multiple choice on a test of reading comprehension, or we can ask them to read the passage aloud and ask them to explain what it means. The third is assessment process. Assessment process can support their students' view of their teacher as allies. Assessment process are about how carry out our assessment activities. We need to remember that the control purpose of assessment is to support their student learning. The last is assessment decision. Assessment decision can support students' learning when grades accurately reflect what students know and do. This decision is from micro level into the macro level, such as deciding when the class should be placed in whether all students can be admitted into university.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Andra dari Sanjaya with FBM 2021-22054. Here I will explain the material about dimension and types language assessment. Dimension of language assessment are divided into two, namely assessment for learning and assessment for off-learning. Assessment for learning refers to the process of seeking and interpreting evidence for use by students and their teachers to decide where students are in their learning process, where they need to go, and how best to get there. Assessment of learning refers to assessment that happen after learning has occurred to determine whether learning has happened. They are used to make statement about a student's learning status at a particular point in time. And there are other ways of defining assessment. For example, formative assessment and summative assessment. Formative assessment is assessment process are carried out collaboratively, and the assessment the question are primarily about the direction in which teaching and learning should go. So, typically, there should not be a mark associated with formative assessment. Sometimes, as an incentive, teachers may award marks for participating in a process or completing a stage of an activity. For example, participating in a writing conference, leading a group discussion. Such a practice may be problematic as it uses formative assessment for summative assessment purpose, therefore changing the nature of the assessment. And the second one is summative assessment is used to evaluate student learning, skill acquisition, and academic achievement at the conclusion of defined instructional period, typically at the end. And summative assessment is in line with assessment of learning. That's all from me. Thank you.
Assessment has multiple purposes. Three main purposes of assessment are common in our classrooms. They are first instructional. This is the most essential purpose of our assessment practice, yet it is often neglected in the assessment literature. Assessment serves to gather information about students' understanding and skills. This purpose will require teachers to use assessment tools in collecting data on students' learning, understanding, and skills based on where students are in their learning process. As teachers, we can plan and adjust our instruction. We engage in this type of assessment all the time in our classroom. For example, every time we ask our students if they have understood a point we have presented, or when we observe a student working in a group. We need, however, to be more mindful in what assessment we do and how we do it. The assessment events and processes we conduct signal to our students what is important to learn and how well their teacher supports their learning. The second one is student centered. Diagnostic assessment refers to the process of identifying individual student strengths and weaknesses, as stated by Anderson in 2005, Fox, Haggerty, and Artemeva in 2016. The concept of diagnostic assessment has often been compared to assessments used for placement or remediation purposes. Both assess learning in order to establish which learning opportunities are appropriate for students' learning needs. In the case of placement testing, however, the purpose is to group students in a class based on, for example, similar skill development, learning needs, or proficiency levels, so that instruction is suitable for all the students in the class. Diagnostic assessment, on the other hand, focuses on the individual student's strengths or weaknesses. Increasingly, external diagnostic assessment approaches are being used to identify students at risk of failing university courses in order to provide support for learning. For example, there are a large number of post-admission language assessment approaches, or PALA, that connect external diagnostic assessment to learning opportunities. Within the classroom, teachers may draw on diagnostic assessment techniques to adapt course instruction and better meet their students' learning needs. Both assessments for placement and for diagnostic purposes involve identifying students' needs in order to support their learning. And the last one is administrative. Grading is the process of summarizing student achievement using a numerical such as 78, or ordinal such as A, B, or C scale. Grading is a complex evaluative practice that requires teachers to make judgments about student learning. Grades are used most notably to make public statements to students, parents, and principals about student achievement. Thus, grading is one of the most high stakes classroom assessment practice with significant consequences for a student's self-perception, motivation for learning, for the prioritization of curriculum expectation, parental expectations, and social relationships. Grading happens at the end of the instruction, and it is usually based on the final product or performance. This purpose is related to summative assessment or assessment of learning. The most crucial initial step in making wise assessment decision is to understand the various purposes for assessment. The goals of our assessment affect the timing and frequency of our assessment, the techniques we employ, and the manner in which an assessment is conducted. The aforementioned evaluation objectives are not mutually exclusive nor intrinsically good or negative. The important thing is for us to think about the reasons for performing assessments, their effects, the numerous options we have when we conducting assessment, selecting assessment tools, and developing assessment processes. We can only make sure that our classroom assessment practices are of the highest caliber by exerting deliberate, educated effort.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Alfisari Hamja. My student number is 2021-22053, and today I will explain about high quality assessment. High quality assessment practice are those that provide result verifying and promoting targeted student learning. There are six of fundamental aspects of such high quality practice. The first one is alignment. The degree of agreement among curriculum, instruction, standards, and assessment. In order to achieve alignment, we need to select appropriate assessment methods which reflect or represent clear and appropriate learning outcomes or goals. The second one is validity. Validity is the appropriateness of interference, use, and consequence that result from the assessment. This means that a high-quality assessment process is sound, trustworthy, and legitimate based on the assessment result. For example, the gathering, interpreting, and using of the information elicited. The third is reliability. Reliability is the consistency, stability, and dependability of the assessment result are related to reliability. This quality criteria guards against the various error of our assessment. For example, reliability is the indicator of the number of errors we are making in marking students' work and how consistent our marking is. And fourth is fairness. This is achieved when students are provided with an equal opportunity to demonstrate achievement and assessment yields scores that are comparably valid. This requires transparency, and that all students know the learning target, criteria for success, and on what and how they will be assessed. Fairness also means that the students are given the equal opportunity to learn. Fair assessment avoids student stereotyping and bias in assessment tasks and procedures. Appropriate accommodation is provided to students with special needs. The fifth is consequences. This term is associated with the result of the use or misuse of assessment result. Research into the consequences of large-scale testing tends to focus on the after effect of the test interpretation and use on various stakeholders, including value implication and social consequences. Some example of these consequences are that students can learn in ways that are consistent with the assessment test. Assessment can motivate, and when it is of low quality, potentially demotivate students to learn. And the student-teacher relationship is influenced by this nature of assessment. And the last one is practicality and efficiency. Consideration are given to the information that is gathered by assessment. A teacher's life is extremely busy, and this influences the choice of assessment events, tools, and processes. Are the resource, effort, and time required for the assessment worth the investment? For example, it is not realistic to mark all students' first written draft. In fact, teachers should not mark the first draft. Rather, teachers need to guide students in self and peer assessment of their draft, support student learning, and encourage them to take responsibility for their own learning. I think that's it from me. Now, let's back to the moderator.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Fajar Ramdhani, and here I will explain about the beliefs about assessment, especially the prominent educational philosophies in language teaching. But first of all, teachers must be aware of their own philosophy of assessment to understand other philosophies and understand the differences as well as the similarities. Reflecting on our own teaching philosophy is a useful first step towards building common ground on assessment in our classrooms, programs, schools, universities, and other language learning contexts. However, you may not have stopped to consider your own beliefs, assumptions, and knowledge about assessment as you indulge in the day-to-day teaching of your class. Okay, now the prominent educational philosophies in language teaching. According to White, 1988, there are three different educational philosophies labeled as classical humanism, progressivism, and reconstructionism. Uh, Classical humanism is a philosophy that values tradition, culture, history, literature, and knowledge of languages, whose main curricular goal is to impart knowledge, values, literature, and language history to students. Students typically translate texts, memorize vocabulary, learn about the grammar of the language, and practice grammatical exercises. Texts are chosen because they have particular literary or historical significance. Performance expectations are fixed, and typically excellence is defined in terms of accuracy. Progressivism is a progressive curriculum that focuses on the individual learner in the sense that language teaching activities become learner-centered. Although informed by overall purpose and goals for language learning, progressive curriculums typically require teachers to define course activity and content in relation to needs analysis or other evidence of student interests, preferences, or performances, which set the direction, emphasis, and activity of the course. Reconstructionism is a reconstructionist curriculum that identifies specific learning outcomes based on the overall course objectives. These learning outcomes guide the selection of activity and experiences in the course, all of which are designed in relation to the predefined criteria which identify what students should know and be able to do at the end of the course. Alright, that's all from me. For the next materials will be presented by the next presenters. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chandra Ramdhani. My student's number is 202-122-066. And here I will deliver the material about what is your own philosophy of assessment. Now that we have had a chance to discuss different curricular philosophies, consider your personal philosophy of teaching and learning and its relationship to what you assess and how you assess it in your own language classroom. It is useful to reflect on our own values and beliefs about teaching and learning language and to consider how this influence assessment decision that we make in our classroom. In examining our teaching philosophy, it is important to keep in mind Prabhu's 1990 advice that there is no one best method for language teaching. This is equally true of assessment. And the next material is your own assessment profile. You may have found some of the statements in the questionnaire above were difficult to answer. You may also have been surprised to find, if you discuss your response with others, that some statements prompted considerable disagreement. The areas of disagreement are the most informative because they suggest deep values, beliefs, and assumptions about learning and teaching, which are unique to individuals. These differences are key when we are working with our colleagues within a program. It is important to acknowledge and discuss all of our areas of agreement, but it is equally important to air our differences and work together towards the co-creation of common ground. This is particularly important when we are deciding how best to assess multiple classes in a program, to evaluate program quality, and monitor the program's success in meeting its aims and purposes. That's all from me. Back to the moderator.
Thank you to all presenters who have delivered the materials. I hope it can be beneficial for all the audience who listen to our presentation. And if you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask.